Hello and welcome to the webinar. I'm Donna Desrochers with RPK Group. Today I'll be discussing a new financial template that we developed for the Ohio Association of Community Colleges and their partner Jobs for the Future. The template I'll be discussing today is intended to help Ohio community colleges think about investing in different types of student success initiatives. The template allows you to better understand the financial resources that may be required for a new initiative, and also the possible financial return on investment that may result from improvements in student performance. So I'm going to begin today by providing some background on the project, and then I'll walk through the template tab by tab and provide guidance on how to populate and use it, and then conclude with some recommendations, best practices, and resources if you would like to use the model. So OACC initially approached us about designing a tool to assist colleges with decision-making around these different student success initiatives. They knew that colleges were considering many different types of programs, including, for example, advising redesign, such as technology-enabled advising, ASAP or SAIL programs for low-income students, as well as redesigning course pathways, first-year experiences, and many others. So the template is designed to be initiative agnostic, so it can be used widely across the colleges. It's also an interactive template that allows you to model sort of different what-if scenarios and also think more deeply about sustainability. We worked with OACC as well as two pilot Ohio community colleges throughout the project. So they helped to guide the development of the work, and the pilot colleges also tested the model with their own initiatives and data and helped us to refine the model. So the result is this planning and ROI tool is really designed for front-end decision-making. On the planning side, the model looks at expected annual expenditures, as well as funding streams for a particular initiative. So it looks at what's the money spent on, including both personnel expenses and operating expenses, and what's the funding plan, including identifying potential funding gaps. And then on the ROI side, it looks at a couple of metrics, including annual retention rates for students, as well as average student credit hour load, to look at the potential net revenue impact from improvements in these particular measures. It also includes some institutional efficiency metrics. So, and finally, the model is really designed to focus on enrollment management strategies at the college level, rather than what might happen with performance funding at the state level. So when we look at potential net revenue in the model, we're only considering the impact of tuition and fee revenue, not any state performance funding revenue. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The state performance funding model utilizes a 3-year average, and so student improvement may not impact the funding model for a couple of years. It's also a relative funding model. So if all colleges perform better, colleges may not receive additional revenue. This model is really focused on the students that you have and the tuition dollars they bring when they are retained or take more courses. So I want to turn now and walk through the template and provide an overall sense of the structure and resources needed to populate it. And it's an Excel-based model. And this is the title page that comes up when you first open up the model. And all the information in the model today is sample data for illustrative purposes only. It's not data from any particular college or initiative. So the first page that is probably most helpful to turn to is the instruction tab. And the top of the tab gives a general description about the model. There are some general instructions here on how to begin. And first with identifying a student success initiative, and then assembling a data team to help populate the template. We generally recommend having team members or project staff familiar with the initiative, as well as staff from institutional research, human resources, and finance to provide information for different pieces of the template. Throughout the template, you enter data onto the yellow tabs, which we'll walk through. And also on the orange tabs that you see here are where you would review the program metrics and estimate the ROI for the initiative. In general, when you are on the data tabs, the yellow data tabs, you should only enter data into yellow data cells. And when you see throughout the template the different years, year 0 is, or the baseline year, is intended as the startup or the planning year for the initiative. So that's the year before students are enrolled. And then year 1 is the first year that students are expected to enroll or participate in the initiative. And so looking further down on the instruction tab, there are more detailed instructions that are color-coded and correspond to each of the data tabs. So if at any point you need additional information, you can just refer to this tab. So I'm going to begin with our first data entry tab, which is this dark yellow tab, the institution-wide data tab. And this is the tab where institution-wide data is reported. So this could be applicable to any initiative that you may be interested in modeling. And on this tab, we are looking for information on student credit hours attempted and completed, as well as the average annual retention rate, fall to fall, tuition and fee information, as well as some rates such as personnel benefit rates, overhead or indirect rate, as well as total education and general spending. And then down here at the bottom, some information on FTE, full and part-time faculty, as well as the average salary for an adjunct. So once all of this information is entered into the yellow cells, we can turn to the first of 4 data tabs that are specific to the initiative. So on the first initiative specific tab, you can enter just a description of the initiative that you're modeling, just so if other folks are looking at the template, they know what it is that they are looking at. And this first tab just requests some basic enrollment information. First, just total enrollment for the institution. And then the second and third lines here looking at the number of students with access to the initiative and that are expected to enroll or utilize the initiative. And these may be the same. They may also be different. For instance, if you have a program that's aimed at low-income students, then the students with access to the initiative may be students that are Pell eligible. But perhaps if you don't have enough funding to support all of those students, then the number of students enrolled in the initiative may be just a portion of those students that have access. The next tab is the Plan of Finance tab. And this is where you enter in the information on the funding for the initiative. It's organized into 3 categories: institutional funding, state and local funding, and grant funding. And so in the institutional funding, there are 2 categories here. New funding is the first line, and that would report any information, any data there that, for instance, new line item budget information, or for example, if there's a new fee, any portion of that fee revenue that is going to directly fund this initiative should be reported on this line. Only the portion that will be used for this particular initiative. Under reallocated funding, again, if there's any money that's being in the existing budget that's being reallocated to this new initiative, it should be reported here. And you also want to report the time of any reallocated staff in this line. And there are some instructions on the instruction tab about how to do that. And some of that information will come from the next tab, the personnel expense tab. The state and local funding area, most of that revenue is likely to come from contracts if you have any, for instance, a state contract to support any of the work. And then finally, grant funding. If you have any funding from a foundation or, for instance, a government grant, you could add that in one of these 2 lines. These light yellow cells here have formulas in there. So if the grant funding is expected to continue across the time period, it will automatically populate. If the grant amount is different in any particular year, you can overwrite the formula and just type in the exact amount of the funding, or enter 0 if it's not expected to continue throughout the period. And at the bottom of this tab, you'll see it will sum up the initiative funding for each year. I also want to note back here on the reallocated funding tab, you'll see we have a note here that says do not use this to balance out the expenses for the initiative. So the model does not require that expenses and revenue are equal. So please do not use this to assume that any expenses will be funded through general revenues from the institution. So we want to see if there are any funding gaps. So please do not automatically use that to equal the revenue and expenses. The next tab is the first of two expense tabs. We begin with the personnel expenses. And there are two panels here. The top panel is where you would enter information on existing personnel that are already employed by the college. And the bottom panel is where you would report new personnel that are expected to be hired for the initiative. They function similarly. So in the first area here, you would enter the position title or the person on the initiative, their average annual salary. And there's a drop-down box here where you can identify whether they receive benefits or not. And then the number of staff in the position. And finally, for each year, report the % of their time that will be spent on the initiative. So you don't need to adjust the average annual salary for the % of time that will be spent on the initiative. The formulas over here that are estimating the salary will automatically do that. It'll automatically account for their % of time and the number of staff in each position. The salary information sums here at the bottom. The personnel expense is calculated, and then a total compensation for existing personnel is reported here in row 35. Similarly, in the bottom panel, it's a similar format. The only changes are there's a drop-down box to report which year you expect to hire the new staff person. And then you would just report their percentage of time beginning in that year that they would be hired. So down here in the dark orange area, there'll be a total salary expense for both the new and existing personnel, the total benefit expense, and the total compensation. So the final tab for data entry is the operating expense tab. And there are a lot of different categories here, as you can see. But remember, this is intended to be initiative agnostic template. So we tried to put as many categories as we could cover different types of initiatives. So do not expect that you will need to fill in all of these different categories. Please only fill in those that are relevant to your particular initiative. And again, if you enter information in the dark yellow, it will automatically populate across these other years. And again, if you may enter in the exact dollar amount if you know it in these years, or you may enter 0 if the funding is not expected to continue across the period. And at the bottom, the initiative operating expense will sum down here. So that's the end of the direct data entry tabs. And so once you have all the data entered on those tabs, we can turn to the two orange tabs. I'm going to start here first with the orange dashboard, initiative dashboard tab. And this tab at the top will give some graphical display of the information that you just added. So it starts with initiative, total initiative funding and total initiative expenditures, which was reported, as well as a distribution of the spending, and some information on unit costs and utilization rates. And each of the graphs has a figure description beside it that describes what the graph is showing. And there's also information on the instruction tab if you need additional assistance interpreting those. The next section on this tab is where we get to the return on investment or ROI estimates. I'm going to start down here in figure 6 and 7. So to estimate the ROI, you would first enter information into these yellow boxes here. And I have already pre-populated the annual retention rate box and assumed that the retention will increase by 1 percentage point per year. Let's see, so when we look at that, you see that the retention rate shows up on the line graph. And the revenue from the retention also shows up here on figure 8 in the light green box. Similarly, for the average student credit hour load, when you see the blank template, these will be blank, and I've entered in a slight increase in average student credit hour load for each year, which you can see displayed on the line graph. And then the expected revenue that would be generated from that increase is again shown on figure 8 in the dark green areas. And so once you've estimated what you think the change in retention and credit hour load would be for your particular initiative, you can come up here and look at the top and see the impact. So this figure 4 again is showing, similar to figure 1, the direct spending for the initiative, as well as the funding for the initiative. And then the dotted green part shows the total net revenue that is projected for the initiative. And this is the total that was shown in figure 8. And then the red here shows the net impact. So we can see in year 1 and year 2, the expenses are still greater than the combination of the funding and the net revenue. But by year 3, the combination of funding and net revenue is expected to exceed the expenses for the initiative, and so the net impact is positive. This next graph, this line graph, is showing the projected break-even and payback for the initiative. So that's comparing just the net revenue for the initiative that's generated compared to the direct expenses for the initiative. So both annually and as in terms of break even, and then over time in terms of payback. So the bottom of this tab includes 2 additional efficiency improvement estimates that may or may not be relevant for your particular initiative. I'm not going to go through these here, but just to note that you can change the numbers here using these levers. And again, there are descriptions next to the figures and in the instructions about how to interpret those particular metrics. The final tab I'd like to review is the Data Summary tab. And this is just a tabular representation of the information that was shown on the dashboard. So if you prefer numbers to graphs, just going through here again, it will show the numbers for the initiative funding and expenses, the ROI that you estimate using the dashboard tab, and as well as some other expenditure and cost metrics. So anything that you see in the Data Summary tab, or I should say anything you see in the Initiative Dashboard tab would be also reflected on this Data Summary tab. So that is the template. And I'm going to turn back now to the PowerPoint. And I just want to talk about a few additional things when you're working with the template. Some lessons that we've learned from working with clients over the years with these types of models. So first, we want to avoid getting overly caught up in the details. Certainly you want to make sure that the data is as accurate as possible, but that also often requires making some assumptions, particularly around the student success metrics. For example, it may be difficult to project what the impact on retention may be. You may want to look at peer groups. If there are any randomized control trial results in the literature, you may want to refer to that, or just use your best judgment on what you think is a reasonable change from the initiative. We often find that the personnel tab is the most difficult for folks. We want to be sure that we are fully accounting for staff time. So there's no free staff time here. Include all staff, and if your project or initiative is funded with a grant, please just don't limit it to just the folks that are in the grant budget. If there are other people working on the initiative, please include those as well. We want to be comprehensive in the staff that are reporting. But we also want to be sure we're not capturing too much time. So for example, if you have an advising staff working on the initiative and only part of their time is working with the folks in the initiative, don't include all of their time, just include that time that would be spent on the initiative. And finally, as I mentioned, we don't want to force funding to equal expenditures. You know, part of the exercise of this template is to identify where funding gaps may exist and to encourage active conversation about how they will be filled. So we don't just want to assume that there's general fund money that will dip in to support the initiative. We really want active decision making around the available resources. And finally, just a few comments on best practices. We recommend identifying a team at the outset to assist with the data collection. And around sort of the project staff, IR, finance, and HR are great people to include at the outset. We also want to make some realistic assumptions, as we talked about, but you may want to sort of model various scenarios as well. So perhaps a preferred ROI scenario, but also a low impact, high impact scenario to project a range that you're comfortable with. And finally, circling back to the initial goals of this project, this really is just one of many factors to consider in the decision-making process. And so there may be other compelling reasons to invest in a particular initiative, but certainly we hope that this financial tool will be helpful as you think through what you may want to invest in. So next steps. OACC will be reaching out via email to inquire if your college is interested in receiving technical assistance from us. And we will be providing each OACC college with 2 hours of technical assistance over the next several months. So please contact Cody Lowe if you're interested in receiving that assistance, and we'll be happy to get that scheduled. We'll also be scheduling a live webinar to answer questions in real time that you may have on the template. So thank you for your attention on today's webinar, and we look forward to working with you in the future.